So there's an estimated over 40,000 grains of rice out there in the world. I, for one, have eaten at least 50 of them in my life. Now, I'm aware my own experiences are anecdotal, but out of the 8 billion people in the world, you'd figure at least a few million of them have to have a similar experience. That experience being eating some rice. Now, where am I going with this? Well, if we're being liberal and saying that eating some rice denotes consuming 50 grains of rice, then you'll notice the math doesn't exactly check out with that 8 billion number. So in order to get more accurate numbers, I decided to look into the history of rice and share my findings with those of you seeking knowledge, which you clearly are since you're watching this video. That being said, let's get started. Rice was invented by the Chinese in a land formerly known as Czechoslovakia in the early 1300s as a cheap and efficient way to feed shoguns. You see, shoguns, unlike everybody else in positions of wealth and power throughout history, were pretty selfish and greedy, so they wanted vast quantities of everything. Obviously, the peasantry didn't have vast quantities of anything to give. You can probably see where I'm going with this by now and how rice plays such an important role. Yes, using rice you can give large quantities of something to someone. This is because rice is made of atoms, and each grain of rice contains several dozens of atoms. The serfs at the time were very intelligent though. They discovered that money is also made of atoms, so instead of giving the shogunate their rice, the peasantry could just give them the useless money instead and have the rice for themselves. Sadly, this idea would never really catch on. Even through this failed attempt at a system, the cultural impact of rice is hard to overstate, as it shaped the world as we know it today. You see, contrary to common belief, rice is generally very docile and doesn't tend to get violent unless heavily provoked. However, there's like a billion of them per cubic something, and the hassle of wrangling up all those grains largely was seen as not worth it for most of human existence. It wasn't until the late 1900s that people began to realize that China has a lot of people, and with that realization of their manpower, the quest for rice catching could feasibly become a realistic goal. There was just one issue though. Those in power were not too fond of the people finding out about a nigh infinite source of food. So, in order to discourage the lower class, they took away all the spoons and forks and made them eat with a long stick instead. As you can imagine, trying to eat rice with a stick is a big waste of time. This was the attempt made by the Chinese government to get the Chinese people to deem rice as not worth the effort. However, the Chinese people are very resilient, and the idea of rice for all was a dream shared by the masses. They got together in attempts to improve upon the stick patent, but the powers that be wouldn't just sit by and let this happen. It was a long, grueling, and bloody process where the people would try to get rice officially recognized and accepted, while the government in retaliation would host big parties for them, instead opting to let them eat cake. This culminated in the Tiananmen Circle Masquerade, a secret gathering of any who wanted to show their support and discuss future plans for the civil rights movement. However, in response to the protest, the government would send in 10 trucks of the stick utensils as a show of power and that nothing would get by them. Distraught but still determined, the folks banded together and began to destroy the shipments of sticks, some even going so far as to break each individual utensil with their bare hands in a show of rebellion. This earned the utensils the moniker of chopsticks. Despite the mass casualties and the IRS wiping out most pertinent info from the meeting, the movement remained strong, and some of the plans managed to get out. Namely, a patent utilizing synthetic cooking glue to coat the stick in, so when you stick the stick in the rice would stick to the stick. Combining this with the chopping the stick into two leads us to the current design of chopsticks that we see today. This brings us to today, the modern era, where rice has been tamed and domesticated to the point that even you may or may not have eaten some rice in your life. It was an insane battle and ultimately one that was largely won by the proletariat, as you can see rice being used in many different parts of the world, such as Beijing, Shanghai, China, or even Hong Kong. There really is no telling on the full impact rice truly has, as once the word of rice got out, it mixed with other people and other cultures, to the point that it's even being eaten off of spoons and forks. Something that shouldn't be taken for granted, as this was only possible through massive amounts of sacrifice and an even more massive amount of atoms.